Let's continue with more news now at this hour. It's been a year since the death of the 21 young people who died at the Enyobeni Tavern tragedy in East London in the Eastern Cape. On the 26th of June 2022, 21 people lost their lives during celebrations at the Enyobeni Tavern. Families of the deceased, together with community members, will today hold a memorial service at Scenery Park Community Hall in celebration of these young people's lives. Maurice Smithers, an independent alcohol harm reduction activist, now joins us to weigh in on the back of what transpired there. Maurice, good afternoon, and thank you for your time with us here on the SABC.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Perhaps for context's sake, let me just look at what has transpired a year since the tragedy happened. Many questioning whether anybody will be held accountable at this point and justice, will be served. Will we actually get to know what happened? What are your thoughts on what's transpired this far?
Well, we are very concerned about that. And when I say we, I'm part of a network of people, including the South African Council of Churches, the families, and a number of civil society organizations and a legal team that are all very concerned that we are now a year since the Enyobeni Tavern tragedy. And actually, the only case that has been brought against anybody is against the owners of the tavern, and that only for selling to minors. It's a technical administrative charge that has been brought by the Liquor Board, but that's the Eastern Cape Liquor Board, and that's the only charge being brought against them. There's no discussion of other infringements of the law, in fact, which they could be adding to that, in our view. But most importantly, there's absolutely no indication that there's any attempt to deal with the culpability for the deaths of the young people. And that to us is just completely unacceptable, because you cannot actually have 21 young people dying and not hold anybody accountable for that. There should, by now, if the police and the National Prosecuting Authority have not been able to find somebody that they can actually charge criminally for the death of those youngsters, then what they should be doing is calling for an inquest. The Inquest Act specifically states that that's what should happen. And yet a year later, there's no inquest. And it's extraordinary to us, particularly given the fact that on the 5th of June this year, Tina Joemat-Petersen, the ex-minister and member of parliament, died under mysterious circumstances. And already it has been stated that an inquest docket has been opened. That's 3 weeks ago, 21 days ago, and an inquest docket has been opened. And yet an inquest docket has not yet been opened around the deaths of these young people. So it's really a shocking situation, and one which is completely unacceptable.
Maurice, I want to, before we get into some of the other issues that have come to the fore at this point, briefly, for those who have survived, do you think we're also doing enough to assist them, given what has happened the past year alone?
It's very difficult to know how much is being done. There were many promises made of providing psychological support and various other forms of support for the youngsters. And I know those are made by government. How far they're going, we don't know. The Council of Churches is trying to also provide some kind of assistance. But I think the most important thing that everybody wants to know, both the families and the survivors, is what happened exactly and who is accountable. Because to date, there has been no official statement on even what caused the death of these young people. There were many speculations about that. And the latest that we've heard, which was a few months ago, was that the parents had been told informally that they died due to suffocation. But there's been no formal public statement about that. And so the parents themselves are wondering, what does that mean? If they died of suffocation, how did they die of suffocation? What caused it? None of that has come out. So I think that generally speaking, a gross disservice, a gross injustice is being done to the families of the youngsters and to the people who survived, because they are traumatized. They would like this thing to be put to an end. They would like to understand what happened. And more importantly, I think, everybody would want to know this kind of thing will never happen again. And unless it's taken seriously, I'm afraid that the possibility of it happening again somewhere in the country is very, very high.
Absolutely, there are more questions more questions than answers at this point, Maurice. We shining a spotlight on society, perhaps how it needs to look at itself going forward. We have to also look at South Africa's relationship to alcohol at this point, questioning whether amending the National Liquor Act of 2003 perhaps is a way to deal with the relationship with alcohol. How do we also deal with past traumas? What's also been reflected on that front?
Well, part of the problem that we have is that the whole liquor administration, the whole legal environment of liquor is very clumsy. First of all, the National Liquor Act, although we do want to see the National Liquor Act change, certainly, and there has, there was an amendment bill, a new policy, alcohol policy was adopted in 2016 by Cabinet, and the liquor amendment bill drafted in terms of that, which would have changed the law. But, 6 years later, that change hasn't happened. That's number one. But number two is that the challenge we have in the country is that we don't actually have effective national liquor legislation, because the Constitution says that provinces actually are responsible for liquor licensing. And so already back in 1999, 2000, there was a challenge to the initial draft of the Liquor Act, because there was a feeling that it was encroaching on the powers and the rights of provinces. And indeed, the Constitutional Court found that, and they had to reduce or limit the things that they could actually say in the National Liquor Act. In addition to that, we've heard from somebody in the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition that one of the things they are concerned about is if they do push through the Liquor Amendment Bill, that is going to result in challenges maybe from provinces who are again going to say that national is overstepping the mark. So that means ultimately that we have 9 different liquor acts in all of the different provinces, and each province can actually do it pretty much the way they want to, as long as it isn't in complete contradiction with the National Liquor Act. But it does mean that there's less national control. And our belief is that the liquor challenge in South Africa, as we saw during COVID, is a national problem. And therefore you need effective, tough national legislation. And we would much rather see provinces administrating a national law, a single national law to govern the country, rather than 9 different laws, which are conducted, according to the whim of those different provinces.
Maurice, thank you for your time with us here on the SABC.